I'll tell you a story just from today. I was at my youngest daughter at end of the year awards ceremony at her school. She's got 15 kids in her class, and I had not had the opportunity to catch up with some of the families in quite some time. And I had just talked to two fathers today from her class. Both have been laid off within the last 6 weeks. Look, Americans are struggling, and I don't want to do what the Republican Party has done over the last couple of years and just complain about lackluster conditions in the economy, which we know exist, because there's a lot of people that are doing very well right now, but there's a lot of people that are really struggling. And so I'd like to talk to those people, and I want to make sure that the policies that we're pursuing and the legislation that we're pursuing echoes the legitimate concerns of a significant portion of our population that we would historically call marginalized.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of American Potential. Great story for you today. Americans love an underdog story because overcoming the odds to achieve what others say is impossible to do embodies the American spirit. Now, today's guest was considered the underdog in a 5-way primary race for a U.S. congressional seat. And to show what he was up against, one of his opponents was a 4-term state representative. Despite being labeled the underdog, he defied expectations and secured victory in the primary. So, who is this person? He's a graduate of West Point with a specialization in nuclear engineering. He honed his leadership skills in Afghanistan. He was a commissioned officer for the Army and a Green Beret. Amidst his service abroad, he and his wife started a business, initially operating out of their double-wide trailer. But today that business has thrived and is now housed in a 120,000 square foot facility. I want to welcome Pat Harrigan, who is the Republican nominee for North Carolina's 10th Congressional District. Pat, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Jeff, I'm great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Now, listen, I asked Monica before we do any of these interviews to kind of get a fun fact, and I love yours because this includes probably maybe my second favorite state in the union. Colorado, of course, my home state, is my favorite. But Alaska is my second. So I understand you got married on your way to Alaska. Tell me that story.
We did. Yeah. So my wife and we actually met outside of Columbus, Georgia, when I was at Fort Benning down there, going through my initial infantry training at Ranger School and all that. And I got through it all a lot faster than I was scheduled to. And the Army kind of up and sent me to my first duty station, Alaska, on a very short notice. And so kind of looked at my wife, at the time girlfriend, and we kind of talked about it very briefly. She became my fiance for about a week, and a week later we got married and she became my wife. And that was all on the journey from Fort Benning up to Fairbanks, Alaska. Our honeymoon was actually driving the Alcan Highway up to Fairbanks. So it was, the Army gives you so many opportunities and throws so many curveballs at you. But some of them, when you look back, are actually really awesome. And that was one of them.
Well, listen, that's a great testament to your wife. If you took her on a honeymoon on the Alcan Highway, because I've driven that a couple of times, if you did that and she stayed with you, I mean, she's worthy. I'll tell you, that's amazing.
Oh, she is. She absolutely is.
And now she's putting up with you and politics and campaigns and all of that. Let me ask you, what city did you get married in? Where were you when you got married?
We actually got married in San Diego, California. So I split time growing up between San Diego and a really small town up in Wyoming. And my family lives in San Diego. And my parents actually eloped. My wife's parents actually eloped, and they both told us their entire lives, if you do nothing else, never elope. It's the worst thing that you can possibly do to your family. And getting the necessity of really kind of getting married on a short timeline, we were just going to elope. But then what we decided to do is just call our parents and say, hey, we're going to get married next Saturday. Do you guys want to be there? We're not exactly sure where. But then that started the whole planning process. And within 6 days, my parents and her parents had put together about a 50-person wedding in San Diego. So as we drove from Fort Benning, Georgia, up to Alaska, we went via San Diego and then just continued moving north. So it was an impromptu occasion that went off pretty solidly.
Well, there you go. And then you took your poor wife up to freeze up in Fairbanks, Alaska. That was nice of you as well, by the way.
She told me when we first met that she didn't want to live anywhere cold. And
you took her to Fairbanks.
And then, she was there for 3 years. I was only there for 2 because I deployed one to Afghanistan. And so she was, there by herself in the minus 70 degree winter.
Oh, yeah.
She really got it. And I got a good one for putting up with me, for sure.
Boy, I would say, yeah. I mean, for her to tell you she doesn't like cold, and then you take her to Fairbanks, Alaska, which, there's not much colder in America than Fairbanks, Alaska.
There's literally not much colder than Fairbanks, Alaska. So.
No, there's not. Well, listen, it's great to have you on the show. And let's talk about West Point. You were able to attend West Point. Why did you decide to go there? Tell the story about how you were able to get into West Point.
I felt called to go there, and that's as straightforward as an answer as I can give. When I was, I want to say, a sophomore in high school, at the end of my sophomore year, my parents kind of took me around on a little trip around the country to go visit various colleges that I might want to start considering as I got into my junior year. And we just drove through the gates of West Point, and I felt very certain that was where I was supposed to be. And, I had no military background in my family outside of my grandfather who'd served in World War II. But my parents were very nervous about that decision, but I felt very clear calling that I was supposed to go to West Point. Felt that as soon as we drove through those gates. So I was very clear-eyed about it. Actually made everybody nervous from those at my school who were kind of counseling me on how to move through the college application process. Through my entire family, I only applied to West Point. I didn't do any other application to any other college or university. So kind of put all my eggs in one basket, but having the confidence that was where I was supposed to go made that pretty easy for me, if not for those around me.
That's right. Well, now, and talk about getting in. It's not easy to get into one of the service academies.
No, it's not. So there's a pretty well-defined but long process. You have your kind of standard college application like you have for any other college or university around the country, which at the time, included all the test scores and all these things that would kind of solidify or demonstrate your well-roundedness as a potential candidate to attend a service academy. But then you also have a nomination process. And most people don't understand or fully know about that process, but you have to be nominated by either your congressional representative or your U.S. senator for the particular state that you're coming out of. And that's a very tough process in and of itself. So it's basically a whole nother college application to the office in which you're applying to. And then it is a battery of interviews with that congressperson or senator staff, and then ultimately with congressperson or senator themselves, usually, as it was for me. And so it was a great process, but I ended up actually getting a nomination from Senator Dianne Feinstein, because growing up in San Diego, at least that's where I went to school and played sports, although I spent a really good portion of the year in Wyoming. I was coming out of San Diego. And so she had deceased now, but she had no idea what she created, as I'm sure we'll get into later in this story.
Right.
So
That's right. Well, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your military career. You spent several years in the military. You talked about being deployed to Afghanistan. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So coming out of West Point, you have the opportunity to kind of select your branch, and it all goes on an order of merit list, OML. I was fairly high up in the infantry branch, which is where I felt called to go. I really wanted to be an aviator, but it just that wasn't what I was supposed to do. And so went infantry branch and came out of West Point, went down to Fort Benning, Georgia for all my initial infantry training, infantry officer basic course, and Ranger school. And then went to my first duty station in Alaska. And West Point's a little bit different than most other service academies, both from the Naval Academy and from the Air Force Academy. You can actually commission directly into the Special Forces training pipeline or Special Operations training pipeline. You cannot do that in the Army. So Army Special Forces requires 4 years worth of experience before you actually move over to the Special Forces as an officer. And so my what they call donor branch, the branch that ends up feeding into Special Forces, was infantry. And so my first duty station, as we talked about, was Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Took over a striker platoon up there. Had almost exactly a year-long train-up before deploying to Afghanistan. And got to take an amazing opportunity as a young platoon leader to actually take over what was called a small air access only combat outpost in the middle of the Arghandab Valley north of Kandahar in Afghanistan. And that was a really unique opportunity because as a young platoon leader, infantryman, there were not many infantry units that got to take over combat outposts. Those were usually reserved for Special Forces. There just weren't enough at the time to cover down on all the locations. So out of my entire battalion, there was only 2 platoons that got selected for combat outposts. Mine was one of them. And it was just an absolutely formative experience for me because as a 23-year-old, I was in charge of about 400 people. I had about 40 Americans and then about 350 Afghans of various flavors: Afghan National Army, Afghan National Police, Afghan private security, that I was responsible for. We all lived on the same outpost. This was at the time where there wasn't any separation, kind of before the green on blues started becoming, the friendly fire attacks started becoming more prevalent. And actually what happened about 3 weeks after I left mine, believe it or not, that was very, very unfortunate. Killed a number of U.S. servicemen. But, it was an amazing experience because as a young 23-year-old, I had nobody above me for about 75 miles. So my boss was 75 miles away. And it was really this unique opportunity to create your own adventure in a very hostile, very dynamic environment where you had all these men who put their trust in you as this young kid to both pursue mission accomplishment and take care of them, take care of their lives, because their lives were in your hands. So that was a very unique opportunity. And having the ability to have that very traditional Special Forces mission as a young infantryman kind of led me to the next stage of my life.
Yeah. Well, and you neglected to mention that's when you left your wife in the cold place all by herself, right?
That's true. That is very
right.
true.
Yeah.
Yes. As I was sweltering in the heat, she was not.
Yeah. No need for you to bring that up. She'll bring it up later.
She does. Sure. She still does.
Yeah. I'm sure she does. How do you, as you look back on that experience and what you're about to do, you're about to be a member of Congress, I suspect, right? So how has that prepared you in your mind for what you're going to face when you get to Congress?
I'll tell you what, I think the first thing that's important from my background and knowledge and experience with respect to military is that we have a real need for more veterans in Congress. I think as we look out, we see that as America fails to lead, the world burns. And boy, the world is burning today. And I think that one of the reasons that is playing out is number one, I think, due to weak American leadership, which we all know and understand. But second, and kind of complementary to that, is we have so many leaders in Congress that don't have military background or experience. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, 14% of Congress were veterans. Today, it's 19%. After this election, it's going to be over 20, which is great. But historically, we've always been between about 50 and 70% of Congress were veterans. And I think we've lost that. And along with that, we have lost the wisdom and discernment to understand the consequences of the decisions that we're making in Washington, D.C. If someone doesn't have military experience, not a hit against them. Everybody has their way of contributing to our society, and it takes all the different pieces of the puzzle in order to, make a complete puzzle. But right now, with the challenges that we face with respect to the instability of the global order, as well as the weakness of American leadership that has led to failed outcomes after failed outcome. We have got to get more veterans in Congress. So I'm very excited to very hopefully be part of that solution. But it's not just about me. It's about getting all these other guys across the finish line too, across the country, because we just have to have more veteran leadership in Congress. I think that's the biggest overarching thing from a 300,000 foot perspective that I could comment with respect to my background.
Gotcha. So now, where does your sense of service come from in your life, in your mind?
I'll tell you, from being and growing up, going to West Point and then growing older through the military, through at least my 20s, you got to work in a very different environment than is present in the rest of the world, particularly in the business world that I've become accustomed to in my 30s, right? People have different motivations outside of the military than they do inside. By and large, folks who are in the military are there not making a ton of money. They're there for a purpose that is greater than themselves. Whereas in the business world, everybody is really kind of focused on the bottom line. They're focused on kind of their own advancement with respect to either position or title or authority or salary. And so the dynamics are just very different. And I have found, since entering the business world and growing our business and seeing that business become larger and successful and all the things that have come with it, that I have missed that element of service. You do. There's something more to life than just making a lot of money and taking care of your own family and doing the things that you want to do. There is a calling that exists in each one of us, and whether we decide to pay attention to that calling or not is up to the individual, but it's there. It's always there. And as I kind of came further away from my time in service, I became more acutely aware of that desire to step back in and to continue serving, because there is a lot of things that are going wrong with our world right now that I think that I could help do a better job than our current leadership is doing. And, that really is the starting point for service. And I'm excited to get the opportunity.
Right. Well, you and your wife started a business really out of your double wide trailer, but it was because of your hobby. Let's talk about that. I mean, talk about your business and why you started your business.
So we've got a business now that produces firearms components, complete firearms, optical sighting systems, as well as munitions. And this business did originate in the double wide trailer outside of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, when I was still in the military. And it all started because my wife said that I was spending way too much money on my firearms hobby. And I needed to curb my firearms hobby a little bit. I was a little bit of a collector, and she was probably right. I was probably spending a little bit too much money on my firearms hobby. But I told her, I said, I don't really want to give up that firearms hobby. I think that maybe a better solution to this is let me start a business where I can take the profits from that business and reinvest them into my hobby. And Jeff, little did I know that, when you make profit in this country, the government's going to take 50% of it, and then your wife's going to take the other 50%. So I like to joke that I'm really no further along in my hobby than I was when I started this whole thing. I'm just working a whole lot more. Have worked like a dog for the last 7 years, and nothing's really changed. But no, that is how it all started. We started in our little double wide trailer outside of Fort Bragg. We grew out of that double wide. We dropped a little 20-foot shipping container behind the double wide. We grew out of that. My last deployment, we actually built a warehouse out behind the double wide. My wife managed that entire project and the growth and trajectory of the business with a little bit of input from me when I was available over there. But after I got back from my very last deployment, within about 2 weeks, we had that warehouse finished. And about 2 weeks after that, we'd already grown out of that warehouse. And so it's been a crazy trajectory for us. We've been very blessed. We worked very hard. We've had some great people come into our lives along the way. But as you said, when you first opened up the podcast here, that we're now in a 120,000 square foot facility. We have about 60 employees in Western North Carolina, just outside of Hickory. A ton of automated manufacturing And we do everything that is kind of within the small arms ecosystem, where we solve problems for our customers domestically and all around the world. So we have a lot of fun doing what we do. And it's been really, truly an honor and a blessing to be on this journey that we've been on for the last 7 years.
Yeah. Well, so you and your wife have this successful business, and then you just lose your mind and decide you're going to run for Congress? How does that work?
I lost my mind.
As if you had, Pat, as if you hadn't put your wife through enough already with the cold and denying her these resources and stuff. And now you're giving her 50% of the profits. And now what?
I wasn't giving it to her. She was taking it.
There's a difference.
There's a difference. That's right. So, when we got married, one of my mentors came up to us at the wedding and he said to my wife, he said, "Rocky, when Pat says that he has a good idea, run." And she always reminds me of that advice that she got. But more or less, most of my ideas have been pretty solid along the way. But I will tell you that I did lose my mind before running for Congress, and I lost it with the fall of Afghanistan. That's when I became really politically switched on, because I saw all that work, all that sacrifice just get thrown down the tubes because we had weak executive leadership in this country that catastrophically left Afghanistan in such a way where ultimately, I believe, it condemned the next generation of Americans to conflict. And that was the saddest part about the fall of Afghanistan, and that enduring imagery of Afghans falling from the wheel wells of our aircraft as they're trying to escape the situation that they know that they're falling back into with our failure, and just broadcasting unbelievable weakness, American weakness across the globe, which our adversaries have been exploiting ever since. And that really was unforgivable to me. And I said, you know what? We have to get this crazy Democratic leadership out of Washington. And I want to do whatever I can possibly do to get solid, conservative, principled leaders of character into Washington. And ultimately, that came in the form of a bunch of people asking me to step up and run, which we decided to do. And boy, we're glad that we decided to do that, because I think we're about to have that impact that we have so desired to have, which is serve the bigger picture of American exceptionalism around the world, around the globe, and make this place better for the next generation of Americans. Because I really do think that we're at a point in our nation's history where there is a legitimate question as to whether we are going to offer more or less opportunity to the next generation of Americans. And never before has a future generation offered less opportunity to the next generation. And that is something that just, in my mind, I'm not going to stand idly by and allow my kids to inherit a subpar America. That's not fair to them. And quite frankly, it's not fair to the rest of the world. Where we owe American leadership, we owe a strong America. People are just dying for a strong America. Literally, they're dying around the world for a strong America, hoping that a strong America returns. And I'm here to tell you, it is going to return. Yeah.
Well, you talked about the sort of feckless leadership of the Biden administration in foreign policy areas, but here at home and the economy, let's talk about that as well. I mean, we see this all the time as you're traveling around. I'm sure your district and other places, you're seeing people who are hurting right now. They're trying to struggle with bad decisions of this Biden administration on the economy. Talk about that and what you see as some of the solutions.
Look, I'll tell you a story just from today. I was at my youngest daughter kind of end of the year awards ceremony at her school, and she's got 15 kids in her class, and I had not had the opportunity to catch up with some of the families in quite some time. And I had just talked to two fathers today from her class. Both had been laid off within the last 6 weeks. Look, Americans are struggling, and I don't want to do what the Republican Party has done over the last couple of years and just complain about lackluster conditions in the economy, which we know exist because there's a lot of people that are doing very well right now, but there's a lot of people that are really struggling. And so I'd like to talk to those people, and I want to make sure that the policies that we're pursuing and the legislation that we're pursuing echoes the legitimate concerns of a significant portion of our population that we would historically call the middle class, because they have been the victims of an onslaught against their stability within our overall market economy since COVID happened and since President Biden took over. And that is really frustrating. And part of that's inflation. Part of that is a changing market economy. The way that we're going to make money moving forward is shifting. But a lot of it is policy driven. And Jeff, I think you alluded to that. We just have some policies coming out of the Democratic Party that are not congruent with reality in terms of driving successful outcomes for the American family. And I think as conservatives, as Republicans, we're not doing a good enough job talking about policies that we think would drive forward better outcomes, like less governmental regulations or our agencies being tied not so much to executive policy as to federal law. We have a lot of agencies that are going rogue right now that are impacting people's livelihoods. They really are. It's more than just kind of what we talk about with agencies, particularly law enforcement agencies, kind of going rogue. They're agencies that are having direct impact on the economy, and whether that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, whether that's the EPA, whether that's the CFPB. Look, the list goes on and on and on. And those organizations are not driving outcomes that are in the best interest of the American people. And I think Republicans need to talk a lot more about that and the specific solutions that we would pursue to really unleash our economy. How are we going to empower small businesses, right? One thing that I would really like to see, because I experienced this as you know, I was growing my business, my wife and I were growing our business, is I've got an engineering background. I don't have a business background. I knew the first couple of years that we were in business that I just had more money at the end of the month in my bank account than I had in the beginning. But I didn't know any tax strategies. I didn't understand how our tax code worked. I think it would be a rocket ship for our genuine small businesses to have them not pay tax the first couple years that they're in existence, right? To have them, as long as they don't pull that money out of their company and put it in their pocket, if they reinvest that money into their company, I don't think they should have to pay taxes for a couple of years. And you want to see what that would do to small business across this country. Let's stop just enabling large corporations to be incredibly successful, more so than they already are. Let's unleash the low-cost technology driver that exists in our economy, which is you and me and every other American starting a small business to solve people's problems where we think that we have a legitimate bona fide solution. And we get paid to implement those solutions, right? That's how business works. That's how we transact value in our market economy. And so things like that, I think, would be great starting points, great ideas that would really allow us to unleash our economy in ways that have never been seen before.
Yeah. You talked about some of the bad decisions of the current administration. We talked about it in foreign policy and in the economy. You know, inflation is one of the things we talk about on this show a lot are the barriers that government creates for people's success in their lives. And as I look at it, government is pretty good at creating barriers for people to overcome when they get in and they choose winner and losers in an economy, when they pick one segment over another and they skew the free market. And we see that in a lot of areas. Inflation is the biggest, I think, the biggest barrier that the current administration and the federal government has imposed on the American people because of the bad decisions that they've made to spend too much money. But there's lots of other areas. And I want to talk to you about one of those, energy. You talked about national security and how important that is. Energy independence is so important to our national security, but it's also important to our families in America. Talk about that and maybe some of the bad decisions of the Biden administration, what you'd like to do about those bad decisions so that we can get people back on a good footing when it comes to an American energy independence.
Yeah, people like to throw around the term energy independence. I am much more of a fan of energy dominance. Right. And I think if we want to do something in this country, we should absolutely seek to dominate it. And we should be energy dominant around the globe, because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, I really do believe that we, with our exit out of Afghanistan and the weak foreign policy that we've been pursuing around the globe since then, that we have truly condemned the next generation of Americans to conflict. And the only way that you're going to win a war, if that's true, is by being the most dominant provider and user of energy in the world. And so from a national security perspective, we have to look at it through that lens, but also from an economic perspective, certain benefits come with being energy dominant, right? Low cost of energy just allows the unleashing of the American economy across the globe. It provides economic surety that we're going to have some consistency with respect to the energy that it takes to grow our businesses, whether that's in manufacturing, in the firearms and defense space like we're in, whether it's in the automobile space, or whether it's in providing services, which, our economy has become a very service-driven economy at this point. But all of that, the stability of that market economy is predicated upon low energy prices. And so it's critical from the perspective of our economy to have that energy dominance as well. And as you said, when the government comes in and it pursues unnecessary or even punitive regulations, when it starts picking winners and losers, or even when it starts creating certain loopholes that favor a particular vertical within an industry over another, we ultimately end up shortchanging the true free market economy that we have. And that creates a ripple effect downstream that ultimately causes inflation. And I think we've seen that. We've seen the direct impacts of poor policy from a federal government perspective across the country. And who pays for that? It's not the wealthy. It's the middle class, and it's folks that are struggling on, to survive on a paycheck to paycheck basis, that are trying to not go into further debt than they already are, that are trying to start up their business right now, but are finding it really difficult to do that in an 8.5% interest rate environment or more, right? As they have to go kind of mezzanine level to get the deal done. That's crushing. And the government needs to stop doing that. It needs to stop picking winners and losers. It needs to deregulate, not increase regulation. And we need to cut taxes across the board, not in just kind of certain special interest ways. And if we do that, we'll start pursuing pro-growth, very, very, just put our economy on a very solid economic footing. And that's exactly what we need to do. That's what Republican leadership needs to come in and needs to do. I am very certain that that's exactly what President Trump is going to do. And if we can get continuity of government across the board between the Senate and the House, I do believe that you will see the policies of the United States of America change faster and in further in the right direction than perhaps at any other point in time in our nation's history. So that's what we're shooting for come November.
That's great. One of the greatest examples I have used, that I think I've used to describe this, or one of the greatest examples out there, is in picking winners and losers. We see Congress all the time, or the administration, particularly the Biden administration over the last few years, deciding that they were going to increase the fuel efficiency standards on cars, to almost unreasonable rates, where Congress just thinks, or the administration just thinks they can snap their fingers and magically all cars will get 70 miles to the gallon or something, without thinking of the technical aspects of that. But what we forget is that there is another side to that. There's a sinister, dark side of a decision to do that. And that is that it drives up the cost of vehicles, right? To the point where most Americans, many Americans today, many middle-class Americans, can't afford to buy a new car now, because in some cases they're $70,000, $80,000 for a new pickup truck or whatever. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it's that way because government is stepping into the market and driving it. And it's taking away opportunity and choice for millions of Americans. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a changing paradigm with how the federal government used to relate with private industry. Right? If you look back into the post-World War II era, the 50s, 60s, 70s, so many of the technologies that we saw proliferate out into the private sector actually started with research and development that was foundational within the government, right? Whether it was defense or whether it was some other sort of government-sponsored type of development, is government took the responsibility to actually develop those technologies, and then it proliferated them to public benefit, right, and to private business owners to their benefit as well, by pushing that technology out for commercial consumption. And now it seems to be a very adversarial relationship the other way around, which is, no, we're going to regulate, we're going to mandate that you guys do all this development. We are not going to guarantee any outcomes for you whatsoever, nor are we really going to pay for it. We're going to create some special dispensation with respect to tax credits or, this, that, or the other to kind of help you balance all this stuff out. But as we've seen, that has not worked. And so, I really do think that we need to rethink how our government interacts with the market economy. And as opposed to being the man in the high castle coming down with orders saying, no, you guys need to do this. I think the government ought to step in on a much more quiet footing and say, hey, these are the things that we've come up with that we think could be really, really beneficial to the economy. We want you guys to run with this. But here's a little head start. Here's not, impending doom at the end of your business by 2030 if you don't comply with some fuel efficiency standards that are completely not achievable, right? That's a very different relationship between government and industry that has historically played out to overall America's benefit. We're not seeing that anymore. So coming back into one of the things I'm really passionate about, which is restoring governmental integrity in America. That's one of the relationships that I really want to focus on, because I think that that's one that needs to be completely reset.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Pat, you're in your 30s. Why do you think it's important for people your age to step up, take a leadership role in your cities, in your state, and in your country? Why is that important for you to step up and run for office?
I think we have a paradigm or dynamic right now where we've got kind of two things that are frustrating. The prior generation has failed us. They've done some great things along the way, but they have set the stage for catastrophic consequences that we're going to have to deal with. The national debt is one of those things. And quite frankly, our national debt and the level that it has been allowed to get to by the prior generation, I think will cause international conflict. I think that's the only way it's going to get resolved at this point. I think that's really sad. Second, you have a bunch of folks who are older leaders in this country that seem to refuse to hand over the reins of power. And that power needs to be transferred to the next generation of Americans. And I don't think that enough young people are stepping up and saying, hey, we need a seat at this table because we need to take and correct some of the mistakes that you've made, move this country forward, move this world forward into a productive order of mutual respect. Because right now, the only thing that you guys are doing are causing an awful lot of problems for us and for our future generations, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. You were causing them to already cut checks that they can't cash. And that is that's really problematic. So we have a bunch of new technology coming onto the stage. We have a lot of integration of technology that's going to happen over the next 10 years. And I think you're going to see technological advancement and technological integration over the next 10 years happen faster than it has ever happened in anyone who's alive lifetimes right now. And the 70 and 80-year-old generation is not capable of grasping this. And so it takes the next generation coming up. And don't take this as any disrespect for folks who are older. I have great respect for those who have come before us, for the knowledge and wisdom that they have, that I'm going to earnestly seek that they pass along to me, because, myself and my peers, we do not pretend to have all the right answers, nor do we pretend to sit on top of the hill where we have all the perspective that time affords, and time and positions of greater and greater responsibility affords us to have. But there's a lot of things that we just see, hey, these are wrong, and it takes us to fix it. And so to the folks who are our age, my age, that are stepping up across the country, or that have the opportunity to step up, I really encourage you to do it. It doesn't need to be at a federal level. It can be something as simple as within the Rotary Club that you're attending, or Bible study, or the company that you currently work in, or go run for school board, county commission. These opportunities are all there. And what most people fail to realize is it's in those organizations at the more local levels that actually play a much greater role and responsibility in how we live our day-to-day lives than what happens in the federal government. I think, just for me, the way that I think and the way that I'm programmed, setting the conditions from a federal level is really where I think my skills best align. But not everybody's that way, and it takes us starting at the lowest level, working our way up to actually change the trajectory of our society for future generations. So hop in there, do it. Doesn't matter what level it is.
Right. Well, good. Pat Harrigan, thank you for joining us. Certainly best of luck to you, and it's quite an inspiring story. And I mean, even the fact that your wife is stuck with you after you froze her to death up in Fairbanks, Alaska, is pretty inspiring. So,
hey, Jeff, thanks for having me on today. I'll tell you, I have the best wife in the world. She was tailor-made for me, and I just love her to death. But she's an incredible woman. I think that before I'm done with being a representative, that people are going to come to the realization that they would rather have her than me representing them. But I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my background with everybody today. And by all means, pray for us, stay engaged with our candidacy, stay engaged with my service that hopefully I'll get the opportunity to do here, and stay engaged in this country. Never, ever give up. Do the very best that you can, and we'll all be better for it on the other side here.
You bet. Well, thank you for stepping up, and we appreciate your time today.
Jeff, thanks for having me. Take care.
You bet. You bet. Well, now, this is one of those great examples of just an average American who decided to step up and grab the mantle and go out and became a leader in business and built his own business, but now stepping into the political realm and helping lead our nation as well. And so what an inspiring story. It may not be running for Congress. It may not being a member of Congress, may not be the way that you can give back, but you do have to step out there, defend liberty and freedom. And I talk about that at the end of every show, how important it is to defend liberty and freedom for that next generation, for our children, and do not take liberty and freedom for granted. So go out there, fight and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.